But to make things more difficult, they have completely disowned their 2010 manifesto and certain policies listed on their website. To top it all off, they have a habit of saying they would do something and then changing their mind at the drop of a hat. So we've had a go at collecting together what we think are some current UKIP policies. At the end, Nigel, no doubt, will tell us if we've got it right or wrong. The party say they would leave the EU, saving the UK at least £8 billion a year, and negotiate a new trade agreement with Europe. On immigration, UKIP want an Australian-style points-based system under which EU and non-EU migrants would be treated the same. Immigration spokesperson Stephen Wolfe had suggested there would be an annual immigration cap of 50,000, but this has since been dropped. New migrants would be blocked from claiming benefits until they've paid tax and national insurance for 5 years, and would be required to have health insurance for 5 years. On taxation, Manifesto Chair Suzanne Evans confirmed at their spring conference earlier this month that UKIP would scrap inheritance tax, we've just heard, would not introduce a mansion tax, and that no one earning the minimum wage would pay income tax. Economy spokesman Patrick O'Flynn also announced a new 35% tax rate payable on earnings between £42,285 and £55,000 at their autumn conference last year. They would save money by cutting the foreign aid budget by 85%, scrapping HS2 and ending subsidies for wind and solar power. UKIP say they would increase grammar school places and have pledged an extra £3 billion a year for the NHS. They also want to strengthen democracy by introducing people's recall of MPs, under which recall would be triggered if 20% of the electorate in a constituency sign a petition within 8 weeks. Phew. Now,
it was fairly comprehensive.
Yes, I thought that was
well
fairly
done.
comprehensive, but there are plenty of holes, as I'm sure you can imagine. Now, you once stated admiration for Margaret Thatcher, who famously said, "U-turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning," on her economic plans. But even with your admiration of Margaret Thatcher, after her death, you declared that you were the only politician keeping the flame of Thatcherism alive.
No, I didn't say that. But no, I didn't say that, but some of the newspapers wrote that.
Right, OK. Well, do you? Do you still feel that you are keeping Thatcherism alive?
Well, do I want to have a country where the state is smaller and people are paying reasonable taxes and we have growth and aspiration in the economy? Yes.
Right. What about flat tax? We've just spoken about taxes. That was in the 2010 manifesto. You spoke an awful lot about it at the time. It's gone.
Well, I didn't speak about it at all. I wasn't party leader at the time. I was just one of 650 candidates, actually. What we're proposing for tax is a radical plan to get the low-paid out of tax, to get rid of inheritance tax. I think they're all very common, common sense, straightforward ideas.
No, it's all about just clarifying what's actually going to be in and part of UKIP policy and what isn't. And when you look back...
Can I just say this
yes.
to you? You know, I mean, I know people that watch this programme are interested in politics, but in general, we've now had a general election campaign that's been going on since the 2nd of January. And what all of you guys in the media try and do, and I understand why, is to try and... It's as if you want the manifestos now to make sure that everybody's completely bored to death by the time May the 7th comes along. What we've tried to do in the last few weeks is to set out the broad principles on which we're going to campaign, on tax, on immigration and everything else. We will release a manifesto in April, and we can then, talk about the minutiae of the sums.
Right.
But discussing the broad principles of policy and the differences between the political parties seems to me to be rather more important.
Right, well, let's have a look at immigration, since, as you say, that is something you have talked about very recently and over the last few years. A couple of weeks ago on the Today programme, you told the programme that you and UKIP would not introduce arbitrary immigration targets, probably on the back of what's happened to the coalition government. But you then said you wanted to get net immigration, I should say, down to a normal level of between 20,000 and 50,000. So what is UKIP's policy going to be?
Well,
is there going to be a target?
No, targets are ludicrous. I've given you a range. That is where we would like to see net migration into Britain. After all, it's about the figure that we had from 1950 until nearly the turn of the century. That would be a return to normality.
Right, but that is a target, isn't it? So you're going to try and get it between 20,000 and 50,000.
Yeah, but I don't want to use terms like caps and ceilings. That is what we're aiming at.
Yes, but people want to be able to hold you to account, and you were able to hold the government to account because they set a cap.
We are not going to be forming the next government. Let's be clear about that. We are not going to win over 300 seats.
But you're going to be scrutinising. You're going to be scrutinising.
I'd love to think we could. But what we are going to do is use whatever influence we have in the next parliament to argue for the kind of policies that give us a radical cut in migration to Britain.
Right, because it was Stephen Wolfe who said there would be a cap, a gross cap, if you like, of 50,000. So this is a net migration cap of between 20 and 50,000 on an annual basis.
Yes,
right.
Which would be a very big change.
Which you will, yeah, it certainly will be a very big change. But you'll achieve that obviously partly by coming out of the EU. But what will you do about non-EU migration, bearing in mind it was that section of the immigration target that actually went up?
Well, I think what we should be doing is treating EU and non-EU migration, frankly, as one and the same thing. Because what we've been doing over the last couple of years is discriminating in favour of people from Southern and Eastern Europe, and in many cases against people from the rest of the world. So what we're talking about is a more ethical approach to immigration, and to base a policy along the lines of an Australian points system.
Right, but the last set of figures actually said 47% were non-EU. That was 292,000 people. Would you be happy with that?
Which represents an astonishing failure of government.
Right, so you wouldn't be happy with that figure. But no, you've just said you want to see more people coming from that part of the...
No, I don't want us to have an open door to unskilled migrant labour from Southern and Eastern Europe, and in some cases to be closing the door on skilled migrants that might be the right people.
Is the party united on the issue of immigration? Because, I mean, I've spoken to Douglas Carswell on this programme, and he said Enoch Powell was wrong on the subject of immigration. Well, hang on. He said Enoch Powell was wrong on the subject of immigration. He said immigration has not been without its challenges, yet it has been overwhelmingly a story of success. Now, you have said that Enoch Powell, with the main thrust of what he said in that Rivers of Blood speech, was right.
Well, I've said time and again that the speech was one of the most misjudged speeches in British politics, and as a result of it...
But you said the thrust of the arguments were right.
And as a result of it, we couldn't discuss the issue for 30 or 40 years afterwards. The point is this: Douglas Carswell supports an Australian-style point system so that we can choose the quantity and quality of who comes to this country. And this is really important because we're going into an election campaign where I suspect the other parties would rather we didn't discuss this at all, because they know there is nothing we can do about migration from the rest of the EU. And with the Eurozone in the mess that it's in, the implications of that are massive over the next 5 years.
All right, well, let's talk about health, because in January you told the BBC's Nick Robinson that you believe privatising the health service was a debate that we're all going to have to return to. And it was opposition from your own party members that had forced you to temporarily drop a policy which was one based on social insurance. Is that right?
No, we never had that. What I did say was that when the Labour Party privatised the National Health Service, there was no opposition to it at all. And they privatised vast chunks of it, including the PFI scheme.
Right, hang on, Nigel Farage. I know what the Labour Party... Can I just talk about social insurance?
I have never, ever advocated an American-style health system. What I did say... What I did say a few years ago is we should examine how the French do this. We should examine how the Dutch do this, because they do use more insurance within their system.
Because you think that would be a way to go in the future, that actually a social insurance system...
I lost that argument. You know, we've had that debate within UKIP. I don't dominate everything. You know, we want a national health service that is run properly, that is free at the point of access. We feel we could find more money for it by not being members of the European Union.
But you've been persuaded of that, haven't you? Because that wasn't your personal view. You didn't agree with that.
Well, you know, grown-ups have debates about things.
I'm not critical. I just want to know.
And sometimes they can be persuaded by others to change their view.
And is it still your personal view? I know you've agreed to the party line.
My personal view is we ought to run the NHS a damn sight better than we currently do.
Is your personal view still that you would prefer and think it would be better for the NHS to have a system of social insurance to pay for it?
No, because I have seen where we've taken chunks of the National Health Service out of state control, and it frankly hasn't worked.
Right, except, I mean, you have an ambivalent relationship with the NHS. In your book, you praise the institution for its excellent critical care, when, in one way, it did save your life, and then you claim it nearly killed you.
It did,
when the doctors failed to spot your testicular cancer when you were 21. So you say you've been persuaded of a...
Well, this is... I have to say that of all the topics that we discuss in this country, when the NHS gets discussed, all it needs is someone to say, aren't the doctors and nurses wonderful? Everybody claps, and it's the end of the debate.
And in your mind, they're not.
Just because you criticise something doesn't mean you don't love it and value it.
Right. But you do admit it, in your mind it nearly killed you, and you should take private health care. You said if you can afford it.
Well, look at the Mid Staffordshire Hospital. I mean, look at many other cases where there have been failures within the system. We need to be honest about that. We need to be honest about the growth of middle management. And actually, you know, I think more public involvement, voting for health boards, things like that, we get a better national health service.
But with your comments there, it sounds as if you're saying to people, actually, you're at risk from the National Health Service. Without private health care, I would probably probably be dead. If you
Well,
can
no, I
afford
would be
private
dead.
healthcare, you should take it.
No, I would be dead because
Yes, but
diagnostics...
what do you say to all those people who can't afford it?
Let's get a better health service and let's get one that gives us a better bang for our buck. Why is it, despite this massive increase in spending, that we compare ourselves to France and Germany and we are behind, whether it's stroke, cancer or heart disease
Should everyone
rates?
who can afford it go private?
If people... We're only talking about 5, 6, 7, 8% of the population. If people can afford it, should they go private? Yes, and do you know why? That would actually relieve some of the burden on the National Health Service for everybody else.
Let's look at same-sex marriage and civil partnerships. Does UKIP support same-sex marriage and civil partnerships?
We've always supported civil partnerships.
Have you always supported
We've always
it?
supported civil partnerships. What we did say was that we found it extraordinary that in the middle of this Parliament, without a manifesto commitment, David Cameron chose to make this one of the flagship policies of this Parliament. And we were very surprised by that.
Right, because you told at LBC Radio that new legislation could force churches to conduct ceremonies that they and their members were ideologically opposed to. It didn't sound like you were supporting it, that you actually thought they shouldn't be.
No, I said at the time I didn't think the legislation should have been brought forward. I thought civil partnerships actually had worked. I noted that even Stonewall, the leading gay charity in the country, wasn't campaigning for gay marriage, yet despite all of that, the government pushed ahead with it. To date, we've not had a court case at the European Court of Human Rights that has forced those of religious faith to conduct services against their wishes, I am pleased to say. It doesn't mean that legislation, you know, is not coming down the track.
OK. All right, let's have a look at slaughter of animals, just briefly. What is UKIP's policy on religious slaughter of animals? Should they still be allowed to do it in the Jewish and Muslim communities?
Yes, I think they should, and I think that too. I mean, certainly as far as Chiquita's concerned, you know, our agricultural spokesman went to a Chiquita slaughterhouse and was massively impressed with the way in which they operate.
Right, because on the website it actually says animal and veterinary science has long concluded that cutting the throats of animals whilst they are fully conscious can cause significant distress and pain. And UKIP says we see no reason why religious groups should not take into account the concerns of animal welfare when carrying out that slaughter. And you were going to support the animal rights groups in a ban on non-stun slaughter of animals.
I never was. No.
Right.
I never
it is
ever
on your,
was.
Just to let you, it's on your website.
Well, I went and spoke, you know, at a big event organised by the Jewish Chronicle 2 years ago in North London, where I made it clear we had looked into the Chiquita method of slaughter and we were happy with it.
Right. In February this year, it looks like you've U-turned and you're supporting the ban.
I haven't U-turned. This is somebody on the National Executive Committee pushing a campaign for animal welfare, which I fully understand, and overstepping the mark.
Right. So that is not UKIP's policy.
Never has been.
You are not going to be pushing
years.
a ban on this. OK, fine. I mean, when it comes to religion, do you believe in God?
I do, but I'm a pretty lapsed Anglican, it has to be said.
I mean, do you think it's something politicians should talk more about?
No, but I do think what we need to do is to talk about Christian values within our country, and that is a different thing, but very, very important. I mean, you know, we do actually have a constitution in this country that is based on Judeo-Christian principles, and that is quite important.
Right, and what's your view then towards Islam? How does that fit in, those Christian Judeo principles?
Well, what we've done with lots of different faiths over the years, and we had been the most successful country in Europe in terms of integration, is we accept, of course, people have private observance of faith. But overall, if you've got people from different religions and different countries coming to this country, you know, they have got to adhere to the way we live our lives. And that's the particular problem that we've got here. There is a very mercifully small number of people, but there are a small number of people who've come to Britain, who have the Muslim faith, who have decided they will campaign to get rid of our constitution and change our entire way of life. People like you wouldn't be presenting television programmes if this narrow band of extremists
God forbid.
got their way.
Let's leave it there for a short break. Now, believe it or not,